Good morning, everyone. Today is Saraswati Puja. Today, okay. And birthday of Swami Turigunatitanandaji. Good. Our topic this morning is being and becoming. This was a talk that I prepared many years ago for a retreat at our Olima Center. Every year, they have, I think, Memorial Day weekend. They have a retreat. They invite different speakers and they give a topic. And the other topic that year was Vedanta, its philosophy and mystical tradition. So I didn't know what to talk about. It sounded like a very dry topic to me. But anyhow, this idea came into my mind that Swamiji's statement about religion being and becoming, that this might be a good way to approach this whole topic, that the philosophical side will be being, and the becoming side will be this mystical tradition. Now, in Vedanta, we don't find such a big distinction between the philosophical side and the mystical side, or the religion and philosophy. When I first came to Vedanta, this was the question that I was constantly asked by people who didn't know anything. Is this a religion or is this a philosophy? And when we look at most traditions, it's a very clear-cut kind of distinction. Religions, there's a theological side to it, religious side and everything, but not strictly a philosophical side. And yet Vedanta is different, of course. It was very hard to explain that we won't make a very big distinction between that. And we also won't make a big distinction between the mystical side and the philosophical side. And in many religions, there's a great gulf between the mystical aspect and the conventional or orthodox aspect of religion. And Vedanta, we don't find exactly the same type of thing. But in any event, I thought that I would approach the subject by looking at it from a historical and interreligious point of view, how other religions also talk about this kind of distinction between the conventional or philosophical or religious side and the mystical, ecstatic aspect of religion that seems to be reserved for very few, that sometimes it's considered a special type of grace, and that gives rise to these different great saints and people that are held in the highest regard or are martyred as heretics. This we'll also find in some religious tradition. So I wanted to start with this and utilizing this statement that Swami Vivekananda makes about being and becoming. And this is really one of his many definitions of religion. It's a phrase that occurs 9 different times in the complete works. And that means that he must have said it many other times that are not recorded, but it was a very famous, favorite phrase of his. I'll just give a couple of examples. This is from Bhakti or Devotion, a lecture he gave. Religion is not in doctrines and dogmas, nor in intellectual argumentation. It is being and becoming. It is realization. Then, this is a lecture called The Claims of Religion. Stand up and reason out, having no blind faith. Religion is a question of being and becoming, not of believing. This is religion, and when you have attained to that, you have religion. So I thought this would be a good avenue to enter into this discussion, because the philosopher will emphasize the being aspect. What is the truth? The ultimate truth. It should be something that won't be changing from different time and place and everything. There'll be some fixed ideas about metaphysics, some very rational explanations, arguments. So all of these we can say will fall under this category of being. Now the mystic, on the other hand, everything is transcendence. Everything is some realization, some type of ecstatic experience, sometimes a very individualistic, a very personal type of experience. It can be this feeling of grace. that we're touched somehow. It won't be something that everybody will get, some very special kind of thing. And this I'll categorize as the becoming aspect of religion. So some transformation, some experience. So the one thing is kind of fixed, that is what is the ultimate truth, but to experience that, this will require some type of transformation, some type of becoming. So Swamiji's statement is wonderful because it combines both. It doesn't say either or, being and becoming. So he takes this as a kind of a dynamic whole, that we have this ultimate truth, but Vedanta won't rest with that. It has to be experienced. Each and every one of us has to become a mystic. Swamiji says each and every one of us has to become a prophet. Yeah, he says that in one of his great statements. So, what do we mean by mystical or mysticism? This is a very vague term. We use it very often, but what do we mean by that, especially as juxtaposed to the philosophical or the conventional or orthodox side of religion? I'll give a definition that I read somewhere. I don't remember the source of it, but it says, it is the phenomenon of the spiritual seeker having a unique experience of communion with God. So there'll be some type of direct feeling that we've gone far beyond the theoretical, that some direct contact, union, hearing the voice of God, something like that, experience of communion with God, an ultimate reality, divinity, or insight into spiritual truths. So it's unique in the sense that it's granted to a handful of special individuals. Of course, Vedanta will say we're all special and we can all have it. But historically, we find that this is not a common type of thing. Sometimes these are the ones that we regard as the prophets and saints and avatars and Ishwarakotis and everything reserved for these type of people. And very often there's the feeling that it's grace, that this is almost the definition of grace in many traditions, that it just happens to certain people. Their feeling is often that it's undeserved. In Vedanta, we have a different idea of grace, that we have to put forth the effort, raise the sail, and it'll be automatic. In many other traditions, the main idea is that it's unmerited, and the individual will feel that unless the grace of God descends, that we're not worthy of such an experience. This is one aspect of grace that we find, even Sri Ramakrishna talks about this aspect sometimes. He talks about the small child who has a little toy and everybody wants it and they want to trade. He said, no, I won't give it away. And then somebody comes for no reason, he'll give it. That the Divine Mother sometimes will just be whimsical that way. This is one aspect of this idea of grace. So we see that sometimes that'll be that feeling that there's grace, that it may come for those who develop this tremendous longing, the vyakulata, that they have such tremendous longing for realization, for God realization, that they give up everything else, whole mind and soul, everything is devoted to that one experience. It's so real for them, and it's such a great longing for them, that this experience will come. And the greatest example, of course, is Sri Ramakrishna himself, that he wasn't content to lead an ordinary religious or spiritual devotional type of life. He had to know who is this mother, and he had to have that direct experience. He wanted to commune with her, and of course he heard the voice of mother. He felt her presence of mother everywhere, saw her everywhere, felt her presence guiding him as if holding him by the hand. So this became a daily experience. He lived in that mystical realm. So we may say that he was an avatar, whatever we say about him, but in that sense he was a true mystic. That it was this communion with that reality that is not available to the ordinary person. And the ordinary person may even deny the existence. And of course, so many people thought that he was just a madman. Even our beloved Narendra, Swami Vivekananda, when he first came, he was convinced he's a wonderful man, but these are hallucinations. He's suffering from some type of madness. He's imagining all of these things. So there'll be some traditions that will have actual spiritual practices meant for this. This school of yoga, of course, everything is meant to raise the mind to that level where other people don't have access, to enter into that oneness with Brahman. And then we'll have devotional traditions among the Sufis. This dancing, this dervish dancing, whirling around, mind will also go into a higher realm. Or this kirtan that we'll find in some Vaishnava traditions and other traditions. These are all meant to, from the language of yoga, to raise kundalini, so that we can have some type of direct experience. We look at the austerities of the Desert Fathers, the early Christian monks, how austere fasting and prayer all day long and all day night, that they would get some experience, some direct experience. So there are means also that we can try to use, but otherwise there's no telling who will get this type of experience, this real, true, mystical type of experience. So the other thing we see is that there's a tremendous variety among these experiences that the mystics will have, but there's a unity there, and there's a universal aspect to it, so that if you got all of these great souls who communed with God or had some type of mystical experience together in one room, that they would be perfectly content with each other. This is what Sri Ramakrishna means when he says there, in that highest state of realization, all jackals sound alike. They howl alike. They can understand. They speak the same language. So all of these great mystical souls will speak the same language. Whereas if you go down to the conventional side, that they'll all argue with each other. But these great souls, these mystics, the saints of different traditions, we find that they've reached a different level, even though it may be particular to their own faith tradition, that there'll be some universality to all of that. If we look at the three great religions which were born in the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we see that all of them at different times had a very vigorous mystical type of tradition. For many, many centuries, the Kabbalah and Hasidic movement in Judaism, it gave rise to many great saintly figures, Christian mystics. Very often they were the monks and nuns, and many of them were raised to that point of sainthood. And then we have the Sufi tradition within Islam. Many other things will be there that were in secret, that were a little bit cultish and everything that we don't know so much about, but they're all a little bit outside of the mainstream of religion and these particular traditions. To a certain extent, say the great saint Roman Catholic saints, to a certain extent, they're held up as the very highest, but then there'll be other times when they'll be considered heretics. We look at St. John of the Cross thrown into a dungeon. Many Sufi saints who were even burned to death. We find the different things like that. So there's always this kind of tension that we have in these Western religions between the orthodoxy, the conventional side of religion, and these great mystics who don't care for the rules and regulations. They go beyond everything. Dharma. We have this expression that they give up all of these very conventional things. You have to do this, you have to do that. That this is that anurag, that level that Sri Ramakrishna talks about. So we find that they run the gamut between all the different types of reactions, from outright hostility, excommunication, persecution, to a type of grudging respect, and then to a type of worship, where they're held or veneration. So this is something that is very common in these other traditions. And there's always a little bit of a conflict in the minds of many people. Say the Sufi tradition, there'll be many Orthodox countries, they do even ban them. And yet, these poems of Rumi and Hafiz and everything are held up to be the greatest mystical poems and everything. And so there's kind of grudging or secret respect for them, and at the same time, they didn't have the orthodoxy that is expected of them. I remember I attended an inter-religious conference once, and there was a representative from Egypt. Of course, very liberal to Muslim. Otherwise, they won't go to these conferences. And I asked him about the Sufi tradition. And he said, yes, there's a little bit of Sufi in the heart of every Muslim. I thought, okay, he can say that. They won't all say that. They won't all say that. Some of them will have a tremendous antagonism, but many of them will be like that. So this is what we find here, that many of these traditions, people don't know what to do. They don't understand exactly, as opposed to the religions that came out of India, that what we call Hindu religion, and Buddhism and Jainism and others, they have some better understanding of this mystical experience as the real goal of religion. So they're not quite that same type of division within the mind, how to understand these. And yet, we will find very orthodox people that say, in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, how the other priests were just so horrified by the type of puja that Sri Ramakrishna did sometimes, offering food to a cat that should be offered to the Divine Mother, because he's having these experiences, seeing Divine Mother everywhere. So this a little bit of this will be in all different traditions. So this is what we find in some of the other traditions. Now, what about when we get to Vedanta? It's not a fair comparison, number one. It's not apples to apples to oranges, because it would be a fair comparison if we talked about Hinduism. But Vedanta itself is both mystical and philosophical. Both equally important, although the real goal will be the mystical experience. Everything will go to experience itself. So we find that the philosophical side of it is important. We don't want to say that this is very secondary and everything. We talk about the philosophical systems and everything, and yet they'll contradict each other and they'll fight against each other, whereas the mystics will transcend all of that. And this, of course, was the essence of the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, that we reach a point where all the differences dissolve away. And that point is within direct experience. We may describe it differently, explain it differently and everything, but it's all a state of oneness on some level. Whether we say union, whether we say identity, oneness, it doesn't matter. There's some type of losing this individual ego and merging it into that ultimate higher type of reality. Buddhists will have it also. They won't talk about God, and yet these Buddhist monks and the Hindu monks, if you get them together, they won't have any big quarrels. The philosophers will have quarrels. This is one great difference that we'll find, that when we get to the philosophical side, and this will be the acharyas mostly. If we get to Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, all of them, they had a different function, a different role to play. Their mission in life was to establish a philosophical system that would form the basis for spiritual life and spiritual practice, that their followers could rely on because it was based on reason and logic, and the way they did that would be to try to defeat all of the other traditions. Yeah. Now, this isn't to criticize them. This was their role. If we look at the teachings of Shankaracharya, one side of it, or one category, is called Vada. This is argumentation. That we read in Brahma Sutras and other things. He establishes his position by showing that there are flaws in all the other positions. He wants to establish it as a very logical type of thing. So he'll argue against all of the other different schools. At the same time, if we look at his Upadesha, his other things that are just instructions, Viveka Chudamani, something like that. We don't find him bothering about all these other traditions, arguing against them. He's presenting something very practical and very beautiful for us. And then we have all the hymns that he composed. So this is just one side of it, but this was the task that was given to him. His guru also just said, you have to establish this on a very firm, solid foundation. So all of them did that. And when it comes to the commentaries, the Shankaracharya, he started this tradition that one has to write commentaries on Upanishad, Brahma Sutra, and Gita, if one wants to establish oneself as a legitimate, authentic sampradaya. So after that, they all had to do that. So for Shankaracharya, he had to show that some consistency in the scriptures. That this is one of the rules. There are all different rules for writing commentaries, that you have to prove that there's nothing redundant and nothing contradictory, and other rules and things like that. So we can criticize all of these acharyas for twisting things, text torturing, and Swamiji himself did. But we can understand that they're trying to, out of respect for the scripture itself, they want to show that it says the same thing. So they're bound a little bit by a certain type of tradition, and they have to establish their position through the use of tremendous logic. And also there's always this idea of realization behind everything, even for the philosopher, that this is the ultimate truth because it can be experienced. So this anubhava, anubhuti, this is the final proof for everything. And yet they'll put great emphasis on shruti, shabda, what do the scriptures say. So this is part of this philosophical tradition. So very much opposed to what we see with these great mystical saints, that there's no necessary harmony or agreement with the other philosophers, a very vigorous tradition of debate and refutation. And in the life of Shankaracharya, we read about all these debates that he had with the Buddhists and followers of Sankhya and Mimamsa and everything. And because he could defeat all of them, he established his Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta on a very firm basis. So this was his task. He was given that. This is not to denigrate anything that these acharyas did. They played a tremendous role in the history of religious thought in India. And if we look at Madhva, we may say, oh, the dualism, it's really far beneath the grandeur of Advaita Vedanta, and yet gave rise to so many wonderful devotional practices in tradition. So Shankaracharya, he was the uncompromising non-dualist, the essence of what I would like to call being, that this is the ultimate truth. Brahman exists. Brahman is real. Brahma Satyam. So there's no becoming in this from that point of view. Of course, we have to try to realize this in everything, but this Brahman is that sole reality. It's unchanging. It won't transform itself into the universe. It won't transform itself into the universe the way that milk will turn into curd. There's no change within Brahman. It'll appear as this universe with name and form, and the individual soul, so-called, is one with that supreme Brahman. Very clear cut. So this is that being. There's no gray area with any of this. That this whole universe comes into being because of this Maya, but actually this Brahman is not undergoing any change at all. This Nirguna Brahman, this is the essential aspect of it. So for Shankaracharya, this was the ultimate truth, and the cause of bondage is ignorance, and the only cure for ignorance is knowledge. So very clear cut. Everything else is secondary. Our karma yoga, our bhakti, whatever else, to purify the heart, to eliminate this ego. But we have to have this ultimate transcending of ignorance and that realization of our own true nature. Now, the Upanishads, I would say that they fall midway between philosophy and mysticism because they're highly poetic. They don't give the same types of arguments that the philosophers will give, and they give mostly illustrations and analogies. And if we look at them, we see that all the different schools can pick and choose what they like. Sparks coming out of the fire. The Madhva will be very happy with that. The Brahman is there, and then we all come out of that. And then we'll have this idea of the waves in the ocean. Ramanuja will be very happy with that. We all dwell within Brahman, we're part of Brahman. Sum total of the waves will be the ocean. So the Upanishads themselves, they allow different types of interpretations because it's not really philosophy. I always feel we should look upon the Upanishads as poetry. And poetry can contain the highest truth, sometimes better than philosophy. That through analogies and images, and the same with Puranas and mythology. Sometimes they embody these higher teachings in a way that we can't do just with straight reasoning and analysis. So this is that philosophical side. Now this mystical side, sometimes we wonder why is there some confusion between the two. Say, for example, with this being and becoming. One of the most famous statements of Swamiji is that each soul is potentially divine. He says, the goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details. Now, the immediate objection that most people will come up with, and when I read this for the first time, I thought, well, why does he say each soul is potentially divine? Each soul is divine. We're told that. That's the being aspect. Each soul is divine. Why should he say potentially divine? Because each and every one of us has the potential to realize the divinity which we already are. So it's both being and becoming. The being aspect has to be there. The truth that we're actually one with that infinite reality, that pure consciousness, that's true. That's the being aspect, but we don't realize it. And that's the becoming aspect of it. So we have to realize what we already are, what we've forgotten, what our true nature is. Somehow we have to remember who we are, who we've always been, because we've forgotten. Some veil of Maya has come over us, and we think that we're making some type of transformation. Now, if we look at that beautiful image of the two birds on the tree, that again we have this being and becoming. The becoming aspect is that the lower bird, according to Swamiji's interpretation, he has to jump from one branch to the next branch, have different types of experiences, go higher and higher and higher, and transform himself or herself into that upper bird. Then it realizes that it was always that upper bird. There was no change, nothing took place. That was the reality at the very beginning. So two things at the same time, being and becoming. That we're not becoming something that we aren't already. We're becoming what we already are by getting rid of the false notion that we're not that at this point. So we may say that I want to transform myself. I want to merge myself into that Brahman. But if we do that, or when we do that, we'll realize that we always were that from the very beginning. So being and becoming, both of these are true at one and the same time. But this ordinary mind cannot understand these things. This is why we have to go beyond philosophy. And even the Upanishads will tell us that. What is the definition that we get of that ultimate reality of the Brahman? That from which the mind and speech, they try to reach it, but they can't reach it. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. That as much as they may try, that this ultimate reality can only be experienced when we go beyond this ordinary mind level. Now, there'll be some traditions that will say that the mind will have to completely annihilate itself. Sri Ramakrishna prefers this other language, that the mind will purify itself or ascend to higher levels. That mind will reach a certain level where the whole universe may disappear, and one will experience these different divine visions, and then ultimately some sense of oneness. So Sri Ramakrishna, he says that we can talk about almost everything except what is the real nature of Brahman. That's also beyond mind and speech, that everything has been defiled by the tongue except for Brahman. Everything is uchishta, he says, except Brahman, because no one has ever been able to say exactly what it is. It can only be experienced. Swamiji himself says this Brahman beyond time, space, and causation. All philosophical thinking is within time, space, and causation. Everything has to be logical. So we have to enter into this is a higher type of realm. Mind has to ascend to a different level in order to have this type of experience. Now we look at the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Everything was experience. At the same time, for my money, he was the greatest philosopher that we have. The greatest philosopher that we have. Forget about any of these acharyas or anybody else, east, west, or anything. I think he had the subtlest grasp of these very deep and profound spiritual truths, and could play with them like children play with toys, or like a potter will play with clay. That they were nothing in his hand. He could jump from one thing to another, harmonize everything. Nothing contradicted itself, because everything was based on his own direct experience. Number one. And number two, he had a mind that was just incapable of any illogical thinking. It was the combination of that mind and that ability to have some higher experience was something unique. But at the same time, he always put greater emphasis on experience. His understanding of philosophy was that this is like the shopping list. He gave this example many times, that there was a man who was told to buy certain items. You have to buy some flour and some sugar and some sweets and things like that, and lost the list, frantically looking for the list, finally found it again, read the list, and then threw it away and bought the things. If we just stay with the list, if we don't go beyond philosophy, if we don't put everything into practice, then we're not going to get the results that we need from that. So, for Sri Ramakrishna, all of the different schools of Vedanta were authentic and legitimate and true, not from the point of view of infallible and logically perfect or anything, but all legitimate, authentic paths which one can follow in order to reach the highest. When he gave that great pronouncement, Jotomo Totopat, it wasn't simply about the different religious traditions. It's about any possible path, whether it's the different yogas, the karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana, whether it was any of the yogas or any of the schools of Vedanta, it didn't matter. That it was a question of two things. Ruchi bheda. He used to say that we all have a different taste Some things appeal to us. So, yeah, when we decide what to believe in, we shouldn't think we're such logical people. Very often we decide to believe in something because it appeals to us. We like to believe it. Of course, it has to have some rationality to it, but it'll appeal to us. Is the path of devotion better than the path of knowledge? I like one more than the other. I won't say better or worse. I understand both are okay. It appeals to me. Then the second thing is this ability to, he uses this language of to digest. That he gives the example of the mother cooking food for the child. Mother knows what food the child likes, but also knows that one child likes this fried fish, but gets indigestion. It's not good for the child. So, ruchi bheda hajam shakti. We have to have this power to digest. Where he says, jaja petishoy, that whatever one can bear, what's good for oneself, what one is able to digest. So for Sri Ramakrishna, nothing is a question of irrefutable or this more logical, that it's a question of what is suitable for the person. That's why he so many times refers to that great statement of Hanuman, that when he's asked how he looks upon Rama, he says, well, it depends. Depends on my state of mind or my attitude. If I'm feeling this body consciousness, then I feel that I'm your servant. He's the master and the servant, and this is dasya bhava. So very good. Then he says there may be times when I look at myself as an individual soul, as a jiva. Then I feel that I'm a part of you. You're the whole and I'm a part. And then he says, but Rama, sometimes when I think of myself as Atman, then I see no distinction. You and I are one and the same. So for Sri Ramakrishna, all of these are true, but none of them reach the level of truth. For him, truth is experience. Truth is that mystical experience, that oneness. The others are paths. That's all. They're different paths. We may argue which one is better than the other, but it's all a question of which is more helpful for us. Now, it's not the type of relativism that will say that you can believe anything, it doesn't matter. It has to be logical. It has to be something that has some type of basis in tradition, and something that we see others have realized the truth through that tradition. So it's not an absolute relativism. There are people who say, yeah, anybody can believe whatever they like. Yeah, we don't want to criticize others, but there has to be some logic to it, and it has to be some sincerity behind it. Otherwise, we can fool ourselves and just come up with and we see that happens all the time. The desire for enjoyment and pleasure, we can say, yeah, this is God's will. We're meant for that. We can rationalize anything if we want to. So it's not a perfect relativism, but at the same time, it recognizes the truth is not to be found in, as Swamiji says, in doctrines and dogmas. It's in religion, in realization, being and becoming. So this is how Sri Ramakrishna looked upon all of these different schools, and he saw that it's a question of what do we like. He was so fond of that Ram Prasad song that said, yes, I know that I can become sugar in the sense that I can merge in Brahman and be that Brahman, but I'd rather have a little separate, I'd rather enjoy the taste of sugar. So Sri Ramakrishna would very often say, yes, I know that this ego there's nothing absolute about this ego. It can disappear. It's like just a stick on water. But I like to keep a little bit of this trace of ego to enjoy this relationship. So his mind was like that. It could go a little bit higher, that ego could disappear. A little bit lower, and it would allow him to have a relationship with everyone. So there are different ways of looking at these different schools. The other way is that we start out as a dualist, and then as we get closer and closer to that reality, we become more and more, that the distance starts to disappear. So Swamiji says, and especially in these dualist and devotional paths, that we start out with some separation. I'm here, God is there. But this cord of love draws us closer and closer and closer. And then we ultimately find God dwelling within our hearts, and then we find that state of union with God. So there's another way of looking at it. Sri Ramakrishna also liked this, is that everything will end in oneness. For Sri Ramakrishna, he also talked about these different stages. In the beginning, as we're trying to get to the roof, he said, then we can adopt a lot of these elements of Advaita Vedanta, especially this neti. They make this radical distinction: Brahman alone is real, this world is false. This radical type of distinction. This enables us to have that sense: what is the real nature of the self? I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. Get rid of all of these things. Have that realization, that experience, that it's the experience of oneness. But coming back down, he says, then we live in this mystical realm. See, the experience itself is a mystical experience for Sri Ramakrishna, because he goes into a state of bhava. He hears the voice of Mother, sees the face of Mother and everything. But when it's this Advaita Vedanta, when it's this Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we can't say even a mystical experience. There's no one to experience it. But coming back down, then we see this mystical aspect where he'll talk to Mother, he'll feel her presence and everything. So this is that going from the being aspect, when we get to the roof, to that becoming aspect. Ramakrishna tried to explain this. That he said, the Divine Mother revealed to me in the Kali temple that it was she who had become everything. She showed me that everything was full of consciousness. The image of Kali was consciousness. The altar was consciousness. The water vessels were consciousness. The door sill was consciousness. All was consciousness. And yet, before that experience, everything disappeared. He didn't see anything. Everything merged. So things started whirling around, the temple, everything. He didn't see anything. Just merged in that ocean of consciousness. But coming back down, then everything was changed, transformed, so that becoming aspect. So it's important for us to understand the role that philosophy plays in spiritual life. It gives us a certain conviction about the reality of these higher truths, the reality of the existence of something beyond what we can see, body, mind, and senses and everything, and it gives us a framework, something that we can follow, we can hold on to, but something that has to be transcended. We have to go beyond just this intellectual side and the cognitive side and this philosophical side, or this, even what we can say the being side, and go to that becoming, that transformation, that direct experience. I'll close with a quote from Swamiji's The Ideal of a Universal Religion. Lastly, it is imperative that all these various yogas should be carried out in practice. Mere theories about them will not do any good. First, we have to hear about them, then we have to think about them. We have to reason the thoughts out, impress them on our minds, and we have to meditate on them, realize them, until at last they become our whole life. No longer will religion remain a bundle of ideas or theories, nor an intellectual assent. It will enter into our very self. By means of intellectual assent, we may today subscribe to many foolish things and change our minds altogether tomorrow. But true religion never changes. Religion is realization, not talk, nor doctrines, nor theories, however beautiful they may be. It is being and becoming, not hearing or acknowledging. It is the whole soul being changed into what it believes. That is religion. So let's sit quietly, take a few minutes to think about some of these ideas.